Noah Webster. Noah Webster, famous for his dictionary, actually was an American founder, and that is often overlooked. He studies law as a young man in Connecticut, and he actually studies for a time under future Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, Oliver Ellsworth, who we've talked about on this channel. Oliver Ellsworth is one of the most important people in founding the judicial system itself in the United States when he was an inaugural senator. A U.S. senator. He also goes on to the Supreme Court real quick and ends up being a Chief Justice of the U.S. Supreme Court. And that's who Noah Webster studies law under. And then afterwards, he just doesn't be a lawyer. He does join the Connecticut militia for a brief time, Noah Webster, but he doesn't actually serve and see any act. He serves, but he doesn't see any action. Again, he follows through on this legal studies and then doesn't want a legal career. And instead he moves to Goshen, New York, where he opens up a private school and he gets into education. And he is really most famous for his dictionary, but he is an educator first and foremost. He supplements his income by writing newspaper articles, but he gets a little frustrated with the education system. There was no education system at the time. It was left up to people who ran individual schoolhouses like Webster himself. But he sees America becoming America, and he wants to form an American identity, and he understands that one of the best ways to do this is to start with the children. And he writes a book called A Grammatical Institute of the English Language. It's a 3-volume work that focuses on educating children in this late 1700s on spelling, grammar, and reading. And while he's doing this, he's starting the foundations of what would become his dictionary. So he puts this all together, and it becomes wildly successful. And it's one of the first school books written by an American for American children that is well read and well used. So Noah Webster, having written these school books, is essentially building what becomes an American identity, and he is not given a lot of credit for this. Now his book becomes known as the blue-backed speller. That's just its general common term. Usually you won't hear it titled A Grammatical Institute of the English Language. You'll hear people reference the blue-backed speller, or you'll hear me reference it. Anyway, if you listen to a lot about Daniel Webster, that's how it's referenced. And this is the main book used for educating American children for the next 100 years. Now, I know he's known for his dictionary, but he is uniquely important to not only educating American children, but putting that foundation of being an American and American education into play. I can't stress enough how important Noah Webster is in creating an American identity. But he goes on to do more than that. You see, this is in the 1780s. He moves to New York, where he begins writing in support of this whole new Constitution that is being questioned whether or not we should ratify it. And he actually relocates to New York because the writings he's doing in upstate New York for the Constitution impress Alexander Hamilton to the degree that Alexander Hamilton pays for Noah Webster to relocate to New York City, where he begins writing pro-administration articles for not only ratification of the Constitution, but then in support of the Washington administration. Noah Webster actually becomes one of the mouthpieces of Alexander Hamilton and by default the Washington administration in New York City. Additionally, he starts a paper called the American Minerva, which is sometimes called the Commercial Advertiser, which is the first daily newspaper in New York City. There were other newspapers published weekly. Some were published several times a week, but this is the first one published daily in New York City. So this all lays the groundwork for Noah Webster, and we finally get to him working on his dictionary. He starts his dictionary, he returns to Connecticut, and he joins the Connecticut House of Representatives, and by 1800 he starts realizing that not only, again, he's made a lot of money writing the most important school book of the first 100 years of the United States, but now he wants to do more. It's not just educating American children on how to be American. Now it's, okay, we need an American language because English in America was spoken differently than in England. And just 25 years before this, when the First Continental Congress meets in Philadelphia, they are a little bit, they have trouble speaking to each other. Delegates from Georgia and delegates from New Hampshire barely speak the same English. It's barely the same language. Now, this has changed a lot because of the Continental Congress, because America was being birthed, because so many soldiers were being sent north or sent south. They were, the language itself was adapting. And Noah Webster took this and he created the first American dictionary. It's known as Webster's Dictionary. You have heard of it. I know now it's essentially been replaced by Wikipedia, but the Webster's Dictionary is one of the most important books in American history. Not only did it Americanize the spelling of certain words, like, how, like, color is spelled with a U in Britain and not in America, that can be traced back to Noah Webster, and it takes almost 20 years for him to write his massive dictionary that contained over 70,000 words. All by himself. He writes 70,000 words, he defines them, he spells them. Allegedly, he learned over 20 languages to trace the history of these words. That seems a little extensive and next to impossible, though I'm sure he learned dozens of languages, because most of the elite American founders did know several languages. So, the first edition doesn't really have massive sales. Unlike his blueback speller, which took on very quickly, the dictionary sold slowly. It mostly went to people of higher learning in libraries and such, but eventually, as I said, it made its way into almost every American household for a while there, till Wikipedia came. Although I should have pulled it out. I have a Webster's Dictionary. It's 20 years old, but probably pretty close, and I wouldn't be surprised if many of your relatives, for those of you younger, many of your relatives had a Webster's Dictionary. So that is the story of Noah Webster. I hope you enjoyed it. Again, just to recap, Webster's known for the dictionary, but his blueback speller was one of the most important educational tools for the first 100 years of the United States. He wrote in support of the U.S. Constitution. Alexander Hamilton paid for him to move to New York City to write pro-Washington administration publications, and then he started 20 years of work on his dictionary. So that is Noah Webster. Make sure you hit like. I see someone just did. Make sure you guys hit like. If you're new here, definitely subscribe. I put out videos 6 days a week,